Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first Jazz Artist Resident celebration. Oh, thank you for turning that on. Of the year. And it's a, I'm not going to introduce Terri Lyne Carrington, our new third Jazz Artist in Residence, because Chris is going to do that. But I'm going to welcome you and tell you that if you're sitting over there, you might want to fill in over here because the sight lines are going to be better for you. But maybe you don't care to see, because most of what we're going to do today is here. Okay, so just a little bit of brief history. This is the third time we've honored an artist from our community into the Zuckerman Institute. So I would like to all to right now just thank Terri for joining us. And so what we're going to do is, I think the best way to get to know a musician is to listen to the musician. But I think you need to know a little bit about Terri Lyne Carrington, and I think there's no better person to introduce Terri Lyne Carrington than my partner in crime, or delight, Chris Washburne. And as you know, the Artist in Residence program here includes a visual artist, a writer in residence, and also a jazz artist in residence. And one of the things that we are all striving hard to do, is to keep a little bit of neuroscience in the mix when we talk about music and jazz and Terri Lyne's history as a person mainly in the community as well as a great. So Chris, I don't want to steal your thunder, so you can tell us all how great Terri Lyne Carrington is. At the end of all this, there's a reception outside with food and drink and stuff.
Thank you, Mike, and welcome everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. I was just reminiscing with Mike Shadlen that we sat down with President Bollinger about 7 years ago and proposed this program with a jazz artist in residence, and he was enthusiastic, but I walked out of there and said, that's never going to happen. There's just no way it's going to happen. And it was such a dream come true that it actually did. And it's the support of the Zuckerman Institute and all of you that are here coming to support this and interacting with these artists that have made this such a successful program. It's a one of a kind in the entire world. So this is something extremely special. And of course, as the founding director of the Jazz Performance Program here at Columbia, we get a chance to work with these artists as well, and we're looking forward to working with Terri Lyne as well. The first time that I saw Terri Lyne play, I think it was with Herbie Hancock, and it was probably at some festival, and I remember looking up on stage and going through the jazz education program out in the Midwest and also in the East. I had never met a jazz drummer that didn't happen to be a man. And I remember that was just a novelty for me at that time. That must have been, I don't know, late 80s, early 90s?
Early 90s.
Yeah, early 90s. And, but then I went to another gig probably a month, or I don't know, a little bit later, and it was Clark Terry was playing, and all of a sudden, Terri Lyne shows up again. And both times, she just completely blew me away with her musicality. And I followed her career. I had never had a chance to play with you or meet you, but I kept following her career, and she just kind of rose through the ranks of jazz. But she was also an artist with, especially that liked to collaborate, that would blur genres, and a multi-genre artist that wasn't just playing in jazz groups, and she was experimenting constantly with her releases. And you can follow the trajectory of jazz musicians, and there's a couple career paths that seem to happen. Either they just keep doing what they're doing and they play and keep going and have these incredible, illustrious careers as players. But some of them, in the midst of it all, start to realize that it's important to invest in the next generation and the future of jazz and become educators. And indeed, that is what Terri Lyne has done. And she's been teaching and is teaching at the Berklee School of Music up in Boston. But then I started seeing her showing up at these jazz conferences on panels, starting to raise some really difficult questions that people weren't always so comfortable finding answers to. And I remember it was the Jazz at Lincoln Center. They this was a couple years ago. I think it was a jazz and gender panel. And Terri started speaking, and it was like the first time that someone was out there really speaking the truth. And I looked around the audience, and it was like the jazz aristocracy was there. The jazz police were all sitting there listening and nodding their heads. And I'm like, wow, she's even got their ears. Something is on the horizon. And I realized that Terri Lyne, she decided to take 3 career paths instead of just the one, because she still plays and does wonderful gigs and puts records out. She's still teaching, but what she's become is really a curator of sorts for the future of jazz. But then not only that, but also for the history of jazz and the idea of kind of revising the problems. I remember she mentioned in an interview, what would jazz be like without the patriarchy? How would that be? And I remember I was teaching the Intro to Jazz course for the undergraduates here at Columbia, and I think I heard you say that in an interview in the middle of the semester. And so I just stopped the chronological order that I normally teach in, and I said, okay, we're going to start over now, and what would it be like? And we started with Lil Hardin, and that was right when the interview came out on WKCR of her talking about her role of Louis Armstrong's career, which was essential. Louis would have never come to New York and gone back to Chicago and been the headliner. He was happy being just a side musician in Fletcher Henderson's band. And it changed the whole entire history of jazz because of this person that often doesn't get credit. And we just kept going from there all the way up. And it was one of the most gratifying semesters that I ever taught, and that was inspired by you. And now I actually have the soundtrack too, because then the musicians at Columbia, we have some very engaged musicians from particularly the Barnard students who were saying, you know, we want to play more music written by women in jazz. And of course, the first thing I said was, oh, that'll be easy. And we just got out the fake books and all the arrangements, and all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, we got to make up our own arrangements. And so we picked Anne Rennell's Willow Weep for Me, which is one of the few standards that's in all of the fake books, the books that people learn about how to play jazz in schools. But then there wasn't very many other ones. We had to transcribe Alice Coltrane and Billie Holiday and Abbey Lincoln because we just didn't have those arrangements. And then I just read about your new release called New Standards. It's a recording of 11 songs by composers that happen to be women that aren't in those fake books. And then I realized there's a companion publication of 101 compositions called New Standards. And these are by women composers from the past and also some very contemporary ones. Terri Lyne Carrington is changing the history and the future of jazz. And that's why it's so exciting to have her here. Welcome. So as Mike said, we're going to start with some music, and then they'll play a song, and then we're going to have a little bit of a conversation, some more music, some time for you guys to ask questions. And Terri, why don't you introduce the team that you brought with you today?
Thank you. That was just, I think, the best introduction I've ever had in my life. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so we're going to play a couple of original songs. I think we have 3. And this is from music that has not been released yet, though I do have a record, as Chris said, that came out Friday, but this music is not from that record. This is from a project that I'm involved with that Henry Threadgill has put together called Baker's Dozen, and there's 13 albums that will be a box set, and you have to buy all 13, so it's only available in this big box set. But we're going to play some of it, so I don't get a chance to play it very often, but on the recording, at least one of the people here was on the recording with me. That's Morgan Guerin on saxophone. And on trumpet, we have Givton Jellin. And on bass, Hannah Marks. And, the beauty about jazz is that it's such a common language that you can get together with people that you've never played with and haven't even met before. And you can, make a special moment happen. And we have this music in front of us, but the music is really just sketches, is the way I see it. I mean, it's a guide. We're not married to it, but it helps us come together, play a theme, and then see how we can improvise from there. And so I'm always excited and a little nervous to play with people that I haven't really played with before. But something always comes from it, and also I think it teaches us something about ourselves as a listener, and how we can't necessarily just do what we normally do. It kind of keeps us honest to play with new people, because we have to have another level of intuition, I think, and empathy and all of that, compassion and those kinds of things. So, thank you, and we'll play this, and then we'll take a break. Oh, it's called Now and Before.
Wow. All right. I want to ask you about 20 questions about what just happened just now, but
Let's go.
let's start with, I want to pick up on what Chris was saying. I would like to hear a little bit about since for the first time people are getting to know you, a little bit about how you broke through and how hard it was and what the trials were, tribulations, and just, a little bit about what makes you who you are.
Well, I always say I had a pretty charmed beginning and career. So not a whole lot of trials and tribulations that I noticed, because I was luckily oblivious to a lot of things too, because I started so young. I started playing at 7, which is now 50 years ago. And I got a scholarship to Berkeley when I was 11. And that was, it's interesting. You talked a little bit about patriarchy, and I realized, now I say this as often as I can, because whenever I speak of my scholarship, it was because I sat in with Oscar Peterson, and the president of the school heard me, and him and his wife, and they offered me a scholarship. But I always forget to say that it was Ella Fitzgerald that introduced me to Oscar Peterson. And it's only the last couple of years that I even remembered that. And my mother and father were reminding me, and I was like, why didn't you guys tell me this like 25 years ago? But anyway, so I got off to a great start. Clark Terry was my first touring gig. So I came to New York with a gig when I was 18 and lived here for about 5 years. And I toured with James Moody, Pharoah Sanders, Woody Shaw. And then I moved to Los Angeles in my early 20s and started playing with Wayne Shorter. And then I moved to Los Angeles, and then I got a TV show. So I got to play with a lot of people that I admired from afar, like on the R&B records and the things I was listening to outside of jazz. So I got to play with people like James Brown and Rick James and even Beyonce on one of those shows. It was when she first came out with like her first record with Destiny's Child. And pop groups like New Kids on the Block and NSYNC. People I didn't actually know who they were at the time. I'm like, wow, there's like 10,000 screaming kids. But anyway, so that was a lot of fun for me playing on those shows because it gave me a different kind of experience. And then, I played with Herbie Hancock for quite a while. And then I decided to make my own music and start leading bands. And then eventually I moved back to Boston, where I'm from, and started teaching at Berkeley. I don't know. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
I didn't talk about trials.
You did that, but by the time you were 90, I can't believe it. I don't know how you packed all that in. So, yeah.
But I think what your point was, you said trials and tribulations, and I think, my point is that I didn't really have a whole lot to speak of, but then one day I realized that my experience isn't everybody's. So I started looking outside of myself and realized that I needed to pay attention to a lot of people that were talking to me, and I was giving them the wrong advice. And I was saying, just plow through, just, don't ignore that, and just plow through and just, do it and let your playing speak for itself and things like that. Because that's what I did. And that worked for me, but you shouldn't have to you shouldn't have to do that. It shouldn't be one way for women musicians, that they have to have these extra burdens that they just shoulder up and just deal with. And it also, everybody doesn't have the same personality. And just because, I was very much supported because my father and my grandfather were musicians. So my grandfather passed away right before I was born, but I ended up playing his drums. And my father knew so many jazz musicians that I was kind of ushered, had access to the jazz stage at a very young age. And everybody, whether male or female, doesn't have that. So I realized, my situation is different, so I can't really just give the advice that, that worked for me. And also everybody's personality is different. You shouldn't have to be tough because, I wasn't intimidated by anybody, but I came from just a confidence that just from having the support of my parents and so many great jazz musicians that we coming over to the house and those kinds of things. So I felt confident, but and also, you're born with a certain. Some people are shy, some people aren't. I was never terribly shy, so all of that kind of worked all in my favor. But when I realized, there's other people that haven't had the same background, I really need to look into this issue because, and also I read an article written by Lara Pellegrinelli, who writes for NPR, and she said, well, yeah, if you look at Esperanza Spalding and Terri Lyne Carrington, well, yeah, sure, they have good careers, but what about everybody else? And she was pointing to exceptionalism as not, necessarily being a good thing. We were kind of raised or socialized to think that being an, exception is great. And it is in some ways, but not when it comes to marginalized communities. It's not good then to be the exception that gets through. So anyway, that's why I started doing gender equity work and created this institute at Berkeley that's called the Berkeley Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice.
Laura is another one that asks all the really difficult questions at great times. You mentioned something right before you got started. You mentioned the word empathy. And I'm really interested in what you meant by that and how we heard that just now and how that played out when you were playing.
Oh, well, I remember I did it. I was trying to write a book that I've been trying to write for 30 years on jazz, which is basically interviews with lots of jazz creative people. So I had done an interview with Herbie Hancock. And I started asking him about, I was asking him about spirituality and where that, meets his creativity. And when we started talking about creativity, he started talking about compassion and, empathy, compassion, and things that I hadn't really thought so much about as being really important to being a good musician. And yeah, I think that you have to, because I noticed, I get along with most people, but there's been a couple of people. I can think of two particularly that I get along famously with now, but didn't when, we were playing in bands together. But somehow when we got, and we would even argue, and I don't argue with people, but we would argue backstage or, have some really rough moments. But then when we got on stage, all of that went away, because the music came first. And I realized, I'm going to support this person no matter what they say or think about me. I'm going to support this person. I can't let the music down. I can't let the band leader down. And I can't let even the person down. I can't let myself down. And I realized there was a certain level of compassion and understanding. Now, how you heard that just now? Well, I think whenever if you don't know somebody musically and you play together, you got to approach it with an open hand, open heart, open mind, and you have to support in the way of not playing in a way that this is where this is and you get with me. You play in a way of where are we going together? How do I listen to you and support what you're doing? And what can I do to make you sound as best you can? Me being the elder here. Which I really didn't mean to use that word because that makes me feel like I'm Yeah, I'm not actually an elder, but you know, a good probably 20 to 30 years on folks. Makes you feel like, okay, I have to be the mature person, and I have 30 more years experience or something. So how do I, or 20 years, whatever it is, right? How do I let that come through and lift other people? So that's how I think empathy kind of works. And also allow them to lift me, because it definitely goes both ways. But I do feel like there's like this thing that happens at some point, hopefully, in everybody's growth, that like when I was in college, I only sounded as good as the people I played with. And then my goal, and somebody said to me once, and this never always stuck with me, and it was some well-known musician, I can't remember who though, but he said, you're good. Now all you have to do is be consistent. And that stuck with me because I realized, I fluctuated with depending on the musical setting and who I was playing with. And I decided I really wanted to be the person, because if I played with really great musicians, I sounded much better. So I decided I wanted to be the person on the other side of that helps to make people sound better. So if I play with my students at Berkeley, don't get me wrong, some of them are great. And some of them, I'm trying to push in certain ways. So my first thing is I don't want to necessarily sound like I'm a student again. And the second thing is, how do I play in a way that brings the best out of them? So that's, my thinking around empathy or compassion.
Yeah, it sounds like the generosity is really at the center of that, like a generosity of spirit. I always found that is one of the things that is really unique about jazz, is that, for it to be on a really high level, you need to have a band that has a really strong generosity of spirit.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So let's keep going with this empathy, because what I heard when you were playing, especially towards the end when you and the bass player Hannah were playing a bit with either staying out of creating holes for each other, and also I think she started this diddly dim kind of motif, and I heard you sort of change what you were doing. So and of course, as we've discussed, my view is that the essence of all of art is a communication, implied communication between humans that have some idea about where the other human might be and where they can take them. And that's essentially what I heard in what you were just saying about bringing your students forward. But in that particular instance with Hannah, I'd like to kind of get a sense of how, or what goes through your mind in a sense as you're both simultaneously hearing and constructing in this sort of dialogue.
For me, I think nothing goes through my mind. I think that, like I've always said, that playing, and that's why I started trying to write this book 30 years ago, because I realized that when I'm playing, it's the only time I'm completely 100% in the present. And that feels like a spiritual place to me, or some people call it no mind or whatever. So everything becomes instinctual or instinctive. And I don't know what makes me make the decisions. I'm almost not the one making them. I'm just, there's this, I guess it's a poem called The Desiderata. Yeah, I love that, because a lot of people don't know it. How many people know it? The Desiderata? There's one person. You know it too? Okay, anybody else?
Guess you guys have your reading assignment.
And it says at the end, and it's really, I really like it. It's written by Max Ehrman, and it's fairly old, earlier part of the 20th century. But the end of it says basically that the universe unfolds as it should, and something, I'm paraphrasing, but something to that effect. And I realized that's what I've always believed in. what I always let happen. So to the point that even in timing, not musical timing, but just like timing of things, I trust now when something is not happening in the timeline that I want it to. I trust it because I trust that the universe will unfold as it should. So even within music, I trust the process of just whatever happens, whatever comes out of my hands, which is actually coming out of, my hands, my heart, my mind, all of those places, right? At one time, it all comes together. And you don't have time to really think about what you're going to do. So, like, I remember what you're talking about, and I think I went to the room or something like that at that moment. And if I wanted to analyze it, I could say, well, I guess it was a textural change. But it's co-creating, co-composing, and, you're trying to push boundaries all the time, push something forward. Do think music has to have, its energy. So the energy has to have motion. It can move backwards and have motion, or forward and have motion. But, within that energy, textural changes help too, with making something, move to the next logical place. And I said logical, I don't know why I picked that word because I'm not really thinking about it, but move to what feels right. And all I can say to that is just from years of experience of what the next thing could be, and knowing when to move to something else, and knowing when to have patience. So sometimes you have patience and you don't change something, but then other times you just somehow feel the right moment to change something. So that's pretty much, if I were to try to analyze what happened at that moment. Apparently she played something that made me, like you, what did you say, doodle-dum? But but yeah.
After a year with us, I don't think you're going to say that nothing went on in your brain when you made the music. Okay.
Well, we talked a little bit about that because we talked about it being unconscious.
Yeah.
So when I'm speaking about nothing went on in my brain, I'm speaking about consciously. So this is why I'm happy to be here, because I'll learn more about what happens in the brain that's not conscious. All I know is when I'm at my best. Musically, I'm not thinking about it. It just happens, and it's all, flowing, and you're in the zone, as they say.
And the whole reason that psychologists talk about the state of flow is that was the word that the improvising jazz musicians were using the most to describe what was happening when they were improvising. And your former boss, Wayne Shorter, someone asked him the same question. They asked him, first of all, they asked him what jazz meant, and he said the word means I dare you, which was kind of the best definition of jazz that I've heard in a long time.
He's also said it means no category.
Exactly, yeah. And then the other thing they asked him, he says, well, what do you think about when you play jazz? And he goes, oh, that's easy. I just imagine what the world could be, what it should be, and I just make it so. I like that as well. In other words, he wasn't thinking at all.
I think we should hear
Oh
some
yeah,
more
let's
music.
make it so. You guys you imagine what the world should be, and let's play another song.
Let it unfold.
Okay.
I think I'd like to give you a chance to say a word or two about that piece, and then maybe we can open it up to questions.
Not so much to say about it. The name of it is Happy. It's because, mostly because it sounds happy to me, major key and pretty diatonic for the melody. Just trying to write something that, reflected that mood, but that was free, because I'm happiest when I'm free. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna, let's see, does anyone have a pressing question or an interesting question or just a fun question and wanna, how many people in this room are musicians? Pretty wild. Oh, some people are actually from the music school. I recognize some of you from previous events, and some people are neuroscientists, so we do cross over. And that means that we occasionally can even get a little geeky on the music side of things. But for now, I want to push you in another direction, if you don't mind. So it's that I think that the way we understand our world is it's basically organized by the questions we ask of the world. It's a little dirty secret of the brain, how it works actually. Basically trying to find excuses to do various things with our body. And the questions that we ask of the world kind of depend on the kind of expertise or background that we bring in. So I might ask a question about science that you wouldn't ask, and you might ask a question about how you're going to handle those sticks that I wouldn't even consider. So in a sense, we see different worlds in that sense, but we communicate them to each other, and we'll do that, all of us as a group, over the year. So I'm just kind of curious whether you feel like, as you've developed your art and your skill set, whether you hear things differently. Do you
You mean in general, or music, or? I think the more we're informed, the more we hear differently, because, like for instance, playing something out of time was not something that I enjoyed in my 20s. because I wasn't ready for it yet. I mean, I hadn't developed, my ear wasn't developed enough. I was still trying to, think about, so much of the things that, are foundational, bebop and, just develop, in that kind of traditional sense. So I couldn't open up. So I hear music differently now because I'm different. I'm much more connected and much more prefer, in some cases, to express my desire for freedom. Because that's, I guess you could say that you have it, but I think we're on a journey. That's just what I believe. I mean, we have all of this structure around us, but I think we're trying to constantly be free within those structures. Socially, hopefully musically too. So for me, it took me until I was like 50 years old to feel comfortable expressing my desire for freedom. But that means I hear, that subgenre, that style within jazz. I hear it differently now. I can appreciate it a lot more now. But that's with also, other forms. And as far as just hearing, it's interesting because I feel like my ear's definitely gotten better over the years. Kind of just working on music and working on it, you start to hear things that you didn't hear before. If I'm producing a record, I might hear like all kinds of small things that I want to address or fix, because I hear a different layer than I used to. Does that answer your question?
Yes. I have a follow-up. Let's hear from Ken.
Could you talk a little bit more about playing out of time and how that works, how you work together without a definite time?
Yeah, there's always time. Even out of time has groove, it has pulse, it has phrases, so there's always something in there that's related to time. It just shifts. So tempos can shift, phrases can shift, and then you're not bound to somebody else's rhythmic phrase. So you can have, if there's 4 of us playing, you can have 4 different rhythms happening at the same time. So you have to not really be afraid of that. And sometimes it makes sense, you can catch on to somebody else's rhythm and have a synchronized moment, or you can commit to your rhythm and not and have it create a tension with somebody else's rhythm. So there's a lot of different things you can do at any given moment that could make it interesting. One cool thing is to also think about it as an opportunity to not to get rid of habits, to not be habitual. So if you normally do something, like for drums, for instance, your hands tend to generally, have natural things that they do. And I'm sure that's on any instrument. Like if you play piano, you first start, you learn scales, and then there's certain fingerings that you learn, and then you transcribe something, you may make up your own fingerings, and these things become comfortable to you. And so when you're playing in that realm, it's constantly an opportunity to break those habits.
So there are people in this room that study how the brain controls the body, and even down to the millisecond, or maybe even fast, even more refined than that. And when you are curating time, to use that expression, organizing this thing in front of you into something meaningful, it's to me kind of fascinating to think about how it's possible to, and we know it is, you just proved it, how it's possible to be free and yet express things that translated through your stick and the drum head or the cymbal that it's going to hit, be exactly where you had intended. And I wonder if there are days when that doesn't work, and might be like an insight for, in a larger sense, into diseases that affect the system. Not that you would be diseased, but I like to think about a normal, what it is about the normal brain that lets someone do the kind of thing you can do, gives us a clue as to when it falls apart, what the problems are and where they lie, and where we might one day fix them if we were doing better jobs as neurologists.
Wow, but what are you asking me exactly?
I'm asking you how the brain works. In a year, you'll know, and you can tell us. Yeah.
No, I mean, that's really amazing, you know, what you just said. You know, it's, like you said, I mean, it's kind of like a constant balance between being free, but then doing something precise, like where you want it to be. And it's kind of like feeling, that's why there is a rhythm and a pulse when you're free. Because, for instance, when I play with Chris Davis, amazing pianist, we're playing free, but we always hit things together, always. And that's how I know that there's time and rhythm within being free. Because if there wasn't, we wouldn't do that. But there's really intense listening. And piano being a percussive instrument, we're like really in sync when we're free. And that's based on whatever information was just played. We'd naturally hear the next place together. So there's something to that. I don't know exactly what it is.
Yeah, but is that a musical intimacy that you've built up over time?
What happened from the first time I played with her?
The first time. And so when you mentioned the word listening, but what are you really talking about? Like, what do you mean by listening when you're sitting behind the drums?
What do you mean?
So, I mean, are you just like listening to a conversation? Because I sense, when I see you play, I see such a deep concentration and listening on multiple levels. Listening not only just to the sounds, but also to the emotions and to the psychological states of those people that are around you. And I'm just wondering if that might be the reason why you were able to sync up so quickly, as you guys were able to hear each other on that very deep level, artistically, philosophically, and spiritually, as well as just hearing the sounds.
Yeah, I'm sure there's probably some of that in there. I think, you know, emotion is definitely attached to it, because you feel certain things when you hear certain things, and you're, you know, inclined to go for an emotional, something that could create an emotional response. But it's also having similar vocabulary. Yeah, knowing, like when I played with Jerry Allen, like I had a trio with Jerry Allen and Esperanza Spalding, and I hooked up very well with both of them, but on different levels. So when Jerry plays certain phrases, I knew where she was going to go. So we were able to phrase. So we could be out of time, but I could hear her time. And I could hear where, you know, because we grew up listening to the same music. So we had a similar foundation of language. With Esperanza, we did not grow up listening to the same music, though she knew so much of that music too. But we had a similar idea of pulse. And even if when it wasn't similar, it was okay. Like, even if we disagreed with the pulse or the tempo at the time or whatever, it was a great disagreement that works. I mean, meaning like it doesn't always have to be like this, you know. You can rub with people in ways that can make something sound interesting or good without it being perfectly synchronized. But there, you know, with bass players especially, it's easier when you have a common feeling about, say, if you're breaking up time, where to break it up. Like some people, you know, may break up in the idea of 3 against 4, you know, dotted quarter notes and that kind of stuff, which I tend to be that type of person, constantly implying 3 when I'm in 4. But, you know, there's other people that break up differently that's harder for me to hear. Even piano players that I really love to listen to, but hard to play with because I can't hear where they're going easily, because they have a different sense of, different foundation.
That's why jazz musicians are superheroes, because you guys don't listen the way that the mere mortals of this world listen. I hope they can figure out what's going on in your brain when you're listening.
Well, we're gonna have to think about the contour and what it means to imply a completion, and and that shared sense of a world that exists between people, and therefore has kind of an existence of its own. And this is what I think we mean by consciousness. It's this connection of a world that actually exists between humans, and between humans that have a sense that they have minds like each other. And so I think that anticipation, that sense, is what allows the contour to come to the same point with you and Chris Davis. Now, on that note of contours and anticipating ends of things, I think because we are supposed to go only another several minutes, I think it's only enough time for one more tune. Is that okay?
Sure.
But of course, there's a reception afterwards, so please stick around and ask more questions, and we'll hang out.
So this song, the last song here that we'll play, is called Pigfoot, and it is basically just a retrograde of Charlie Parker song called Bigfoot, which I can't even remember how that goes now. How many people know that song, Bigfoot? Okay, who can hum it? The beginning of it. Anybody? Oh, I can't hear you. Say it, Judy.
I think I'm mixing up with Cheryl.
Charlie Parker has so many good.
That's Cheryl.
Well, I can't read backwards, so. Dang, how does it go? Can you read backwards? No. Can you read backwards, Morgan? Start to end and.
Should I find a recording?
Yeah, I can't read backwards. I can't remember how it goes. If you have it handy, play a little bit of it.
Literally just a reduction.
Yeah. Retrograde. Yeah. Okay. So, anyway. So now you know where this is coming from. Okay. What? 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And thank you to Gibton, Jellen, Morgan Guerin, and Hannah Marks. Thanks.
Thank you all for coming, and for those that listened online, I hope it was pleasurable. And it's just the beginning. We don't really do science here. We just basically listen to music, and so especially the first-year students, welcome. Let's thank Terri Lyne Carrington and her band. And thanks Zuckerman Institute for sponsoring this. It's fantastic to work in an institute that actually is doing this. Chris, thank you so much.